Hold on, hold on, just a little while longer. Hold on, just a little while longer. Hold on, just a little while longer, and everything is gonna be all right, and the valley pray on, just a little while longer. Pray on, just a little while longer. Pray on, just a little while longer, and everything is gonna be all right. Good afternoon, and welcome to Exploring the Gullah Culture. As was stated, I'm Sharon Cooper-Murray, and am known as the Gullah Lady. And today, we'd actually like to look at four things. First, we'll look at who the ancestors of the Gullah people were and why they came to Carolina. We'll also look at the English Creole, their language, which is also known as Gullah. And then we'll look at music, traditional Gullah folk music. And the last thing that we are going to touch on will be the textile traditions of the Gullah folks. And if you look at the two displays right below me, they are examples of what rag quilting is about. But first, let's look at the word culture. What are some of the visuals that might indicate a person belongs to a specific culture? Can anyone think of anything? Yes, it could be their clothing. It could be the way they prepare foods. It could be the way they do their hair. According to the dictionary, culture is the collective memories, traditions, and practices of a group, a company, or a product that might be for sale. So all of these things have culture. Well, let me give you a little background on who the Gullah people are. As I said, the Gullah people are the descendants of West African slaves that were brought to Carolina for the rice culture. The most accepted theory of how rice entered Carolina says that a captain of a slaving vessel that had been traveling the Isles of Madagascar ported into Charlestown, Charleston as we know today. When he arrived, his ship had been heavily damaged and he was very ill. This was somehow brought to the attention of a Dr. Woodward, who invited him into his home and nursed him back to health. In appreciation for the medical assistance and the hospitality, he gave him several bags of seed rice. Well, Dr. Woodward was not only a physician, he was also a planter. So he started to experiment with the crop. Realizing it would grow, he shared this with other planters, and that was the beginning of the rice culture. When they initially started to grow rice, they grew it in the swamp. But there was a problem. The kind of rice introduced in Carolina was named Carolina Gold, and today I actually brought a sample of that heirloom rice. Now, it was named Carolina Gold because in the sun, the seeds tended to glisten, and often was said they looked like gold in the fields. Well, once they started to plant the rice in the field, in the swamp, One of the things that was the problem was this type of rice needed to be flooded 3 times. Well, there was a problem. Since they'd use man-made tools to try to flood and drain the fields, they often find they couldn't adequately flood a field, nor could they adequately drain the field. But they realized it would grow. Now, this was around 1685. It took until after the Revolutionary War for the idea to come to someone to move the fields from the swamp and move them down to the river's edge. And in doing so, one could rely on nature, the ebb and flow of the tides. So when you want to flood the field, just wait until tide's coming in. If you want to drain the fields, just wait until tide's going out. And that was when rice started to boom. It was also when there was a need for a very large labor force. At the time, there were only 2 known groups that had been growing rice for centuries. They were the Africans and the Asians. There was somewhat of a problem getting to China, but Africans were already being sold into slavery in places like Brazil for sugarcane, the Caribbean, Barbados, also for sugarcane. So it was known where one could find an ample supply of people that had the skill for this new rice crop that was growing in Carolina. Now, what I'm going to briefly do is go through the course of 1 year on a rice plantation, starting at planting season, so we can use the tools and let you see how they were used. Rice could be planted in May or June. So let's just say that this crop is to be planted in May. When they planted rice, they called it planting African style. When rice rows were banked, they were banked like any other row in a field or a garden. The only difference was a slight trench in the center of the bank. Well, they would go into the fields with a sack of seed rice, and seed rice is actually rice that's still in the hull. They would go with a bag and they would take seed grains out, drop them into the trench, and then use the ball of the foot to cover the seeds with dirt. Immediately after the rice was planted, it would be flooded. This flooding would last from 8 to 10 days, and the field would be drained and start to grow. If one could stand about 50 feet away from a field and look up and down the rows, and all you saw were the small green sprouts, it would then be time for the second flooding, which lasted about 2 weeks. At the same time the sprouts are growing, weeds are also growing. So this second flooding was designed to kill the weeds. At the end of the 2 weeks, the field would be drained and field hands were sent in. They'd go in with hoes and they'd chop all the weeds that weren't killed by the flooding, and the stalks would continue to grow. As soon as they started to bud at the top, it would then be time for the third flooding. This flooding would last from 6 to 8 weeks, because you see, a rice stalk, as these are very thin and fragile, actually too thin to support the seeds that grow at the top. So as the stalks grew, the water would be gradually elevated. The water served as support. Now, the kind of water they used in a rice field was called brackish water. Fresh water on the bottom, salt water on the top, and the two don't mix. At the end of the 6 to 8 weeks, the field would be drained, set a few days, and once again, field hands were sent in. They'd go in with sickle knives, which are the curve-shaped knives. They'd grab the stalks about 12 inches above the ground, chop them off, then lay the stalks on the stubble. A second group would come behind them, bundle them into sheaves, put them on the oxen cart, which would travel the dike to the river, where a flatboat would carry it to the workyard. When it got to the workyard, the top priority would be to dry it out as quickly as possible before rotting could start to set in. So they'd build a mound. The mounds were from 8 to 10 feet tall. When they started building the mound at ground level, they'd lay the seeds inward with the ends of the stalks sticking out. By the time they reached the last 5 or 6 tiers, they'd start to stick the ends of the stalk inward with the seeds flapping out. It would somewhat look like an umbrella, because by the time harvesting takes place, we're in what we call hurricane season, and it could rain at almost any time. But by putting this umbrella-like topping on it, it would ensure that some rice would always be dried and the process could continue and they would be able to process and get it out on time. Now let's just say that the rice is now dried and it's time to hand process. They would go to the mound and grab several bundles and lay it on the ground, and then take this tool. This is called a flail, and a flail is used for threshing. So they'd lay the bundles on the ground and then take the long stick and flip the short stick over. Each time, well, that usually doesn't happen, but each time that the short stick would hit the bundle, it would just jar the grains to the ground. Now, while you're threshing, you're going to break stalks. If it's a windy day, then whatever bits and pieces of trash that are blowing about in the wind, they'd also get mixed with the grain. The larger pieces, one could pick them up and throw them aside, but the smaller pieces would be scooped up and placed into this basket. This basket is known as a sweetgrass basket, but the specific type is called a fanner basket. And a fanner is used for winnowing. Winnowing is like sifting. So they'd scoop the grains and trash up from the ground, put it into the basket, and then in a circular motion and up. The idea is the wind would blow the trash away and the grains would fall back into the basket. Rice grows in a hull like a peanut. So the next step is to crack the hull to get the grain out. So we'll go to the mortar. A mortar is just a hollowed out stump. And the way they would hollow the stump out is build a fire and get the hot coals and set in the center of the stump. As the coals begin to burn, it will start to create the bowl shape. As long as you wet the sides to make sure that it doesn't burn through, when you get to the depth and the width of the bowl you want, simply out it, scrape it out, and you've got the bowl. The pestle is just a limb cut from a tree. It has a flat end and a cone-shaped end. So we have the rice in the mortar, and now we have to pound the rice to crack the hull. Now, pounding is done in a pound and twist. As you pound, you crack the hull. When you twist, you roll the grain out. Now, in a mortar this size, there would probably be 2 children that would work the mortar. So now that we've cracked the hulls, it's time to go back to the fanner basket. Once again, scooping it out of the mortar, because this time we have to separate the hulls from the grain. So again, it's scooped up and thrown up in a circular motion. The hulls blow away, the grains fall back into the basket. They believed at that time that if they didn't remove the starch from the grains, they would rot before they got to Europe and the other ports they were being sent to. So one more time back to the mortar. And this time it's to polish the rice. And polishing is done with the cone-shaped end by stirring. As you stir, the grains would rub against each other and the starch would fall to the bottom of the mortar. By the time they completed harvesting and hand processing the rice, it would generally be very close to Christmas. And in those days, one needed to get the crops shipped out before the cold weather set in. Otherwise, the entire shipment would be in jeopardy because the cold weather and the storms could actually run havoc on the rice grains. So once they were shipped out, we'd be very close to Christmas, and by the 1800s, it was pretty much standard on many plantations that there'd be from 3 to 5 days where there would be no work done on the plantation. And they observed things like Christmas, but they also observed things like Boxing Day. And on that day, the mistress and the master of the house would give out gifts. They would put things in boxes, and if someone had done something particularly industriously, they would also get special gifts. But at the end of the 3 to 5 days, it would be time to return to the rice fields for the maintenance. They would have to go into the fields and plow them under. They also would look at the floodgates, because floodgates were made out of wood and wrought iron. And over time, they'd start to deteriorate. So if some were in ill repair, they would take the wooden pieces to the carpenter, the wrought iron pieces to the blacksmith. They'd fashion new ones, replace these gates, and by the time this was done for all of the fields on the plantation, it would generally be the end of April, and one could start to plant in May. Now that's the kind of work that they were brought here to do, and particularly in the Low Country, what we call Carolina. Now at that time, Carolina reached from Wilmington, North Carolina to Florida. So during that area is where the Gullah people actually existed. But think about this. Some of the Africans that were brought from Barbados also were accustomed to the English language, but many of them that were brought directly from Africa were not. So it's said that they came to the Low Country, the New World, speaking up to 109 different languages and dialects. So they were in slavery and they could hardly understand one another. For the plantation system to work, it became imperative that a common language be created, one that not only the slaves could understand, but one that the overseer and the master could understand as well, because they are being given orders, and you have to understand what's being told for you to do. So they created what we call today an English Creole. Now this English Creole is called Gullah. Gullah is said to believe to be mixed with 14 languages. And that would be the languages of the mariners they came in contact with on the Middle Passage, in the conditioning forts, and on the varying plantations. They combined those 14 languages with up to 109 African languages and dialects. But because they came to the New World, which is English-based, today, the majority of the words that you hear in Gullah are English words, but they are spoken on the rhythms of West African languages, and they also have the same grammatical structure. I wanted you to hear the cadence and the flow of the Gullah language, so I thought I'd introduce the language to you. And in doing so, instead of standing up here and lecturing you for an hour and a half, because sometimes when I hear a lecture for an hour and a half, I only actually hear the first 30 minutes. And I wanted to make sure that you got a feel of what the language sounds like. Now, before I do that, I'd like to tell you how I was introduced to the Gullah language. As I said, I was born in the PD and went to public school here. But when I moved to the islands, after I'd lived several other places, I kind of went to the islands on vacation, because my aunt and uncle had lived in New York, and they decided to retire and move back to his home, which was Wadmalaw Island. And they contacted me and said they had moved to an island. Well, when I thought of an island, I thought of like a St. Croix or Belize or something like that. So needless to say, I gathered together every swimsuit I possibly could find, because after all, I was going to be the new woman on the island. So I thought I would stay at the beach and I was going to have this wonderful time. Well, she picked me up and we started the ride, and we rode and rode and rode and rode, and finally we got to a wooden hump bridge. And I mean that. It was a wooden bridge that humped. My aunt drove really fast. So when you come down on the other side of the bridge, the pit of your stomach quivers. But she kept driving. Well, I was an adult, so I didn't want to ask the question that children do on road trips. So I tried to think of another way to phrase it. So I said, "Auntie, tell me, when are we going to get to your island? And she looked at me and said, Sharon, we're on the island. And I looked around, and all I saw were vegetable fields and the woods everywhere. So I said, no, 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 I'm talking about the island part of the island. And she said, oh, you know what? I'll bet you thought we were an island because we were surrounded by the ocean. You see, we're an island because we're surrounded by rivers, so we don't have beaches. But you know what? We do have boat landings. And I thought to myself, what am I doing here? But I'd agreed to stay a week, so I couldn't just pout all week because it didn't turn out the way I thought it would. After several days, I decided that I would venture out and kind of see what was on this agricultural island that I found myself. Well, instead of retiring, my uncle bought the general store, and next door to it, he built a small liquor store. So I walked into the general store. Now, the general store is what I call a shotgun store. And those buildings aren't really very wide, but they're really long. So I walked in the store and walked all the way to the back of the store. Well, I couldn't hear what the people were saying, but I could hear them murmuring, but there was something else that I noticed. If someone wanted something from the liquor store, my uncle would leave the general store and walk over to the liquor store and get it and come back. Now, after seeing him do that 4 or 5 times, I really thought that was the most ridiculous thing I'd ever seen. Who leaves the customer in the store with the cash register and goes to another building? No one does that. So I thought, you know what? To save him from having to do that, I'll work the liquor store for this week that I'm going to be here. It was the smallest. So the next morning, I got up bright and early, familiarized myself with everything on the shelves, and waited for my first customer. Well, I waited and waited and waited until late afternoon, and my first customer walked in. Well, when he walked in, I hopped up, because after all, I was going to be a proprietor. Well, he walked to the counter and he said, "Kuya na uya pibara." I said, you know, I tried to think of something that sounded like something sensible, but the only thing that came out was, huh? He said, "You get yeri you pibara." You know, sometimes you think when you hear a foreign language that if you kind of like squeeze your hands and squint your eyes, you can kind of make out what they're saying. Well, I think soon he just got a little tired of me and he said, "Get that foggy bottle over there." So I said, "Excuse me." And I walked over to the general store and got my uncle and brought him back over, and he waited on the man. Well, I didn't think to ask him, what did he say? I noticed what he bought, though, and that was the largest amount of liquor in the entire store. So I surmised that the majority of the people that lived on Wadmalaw Island apparently drank that. So if someone else comes into the store and they sound like that, I'm going to ease one of those bottles toward them. And I did, and I was wrong. And so 4 or 5 times later, my uncle comes in and he says, "Sharon, you know what? I've just been thinking. You want to help, don't you, while you're here? Well, I'll tell you what I'll do. Why don't you just go in that house and get that vacuum and duster?" Because, you know, that was his kind way of saying, actually, you're causing me more work than before you came by coming and getting me constantly. Well, that was my introduction to the Gullah language. Now, when the man walked in the store, he says, "Kuya na uya pibara?" And to roughly translate that, he said, "Hey, who's your family?" Well, of course, I don't understand what he says. So he says, "You get uya pibara?" And to roughly translate that, he says, "Are you deaf? Who's your family?" And I still don't know what he's saying. So finally he said, "Get that foggy bottle over there." Well, the last sentence I don't have to roughly translate. The last sentence was all English words, and I'll simply say it a little slower. He said, "Give me that foggy bottle over there." He said, give me that foggy bottle over there. Now, the Gullah language is what's known as a descriptive language, in that he described what's called Gilby's gin. Gilby's gin comes in a bottle that appears frosted on the outside. So if you go into a Gullah community and you ask someone for directions, it's unlikely that you would hear, take Smith Street and turn right on Jones, turn left again on Brown Street. What they would probably tell you is you go down the road down there, and when you see the trees lap over the road, then you turn by the blue house. So what they tend to do is describe what you would see, or they describe those things that you ask rather than giving many of those things the proper name. Okay, so I want to introduce you to that language that I was introduced to, and the language that eventually became the career. I often say that some people choose a career and others, the career chooses them. That's how I became a storyteller. And I thought it might be interesting to introduce you to the Gullah language by telling you a story. Now, as I said, I didn't understand the language when I got there initially, but I finally figured out, instead of looking at people as if they were a book, like initially I tried to study about them. So I researched everything I could possibly find about them. But you know, it's really impossible to learn about someone else, truly, unless you are willing to extend further than just at arm's length. You need to get to know the people. So I came up with this really, I thought, bright idea, was that I'd conduct an oral history project. And I did. The people I interviewed were from 78 to 96, and they told me of their lives when they were children, and they told me the stories of their lives. Well, there was one of them we called Mawiz, who became my friend. Because you see, when I opened my mouth on the Gullah Islands, everyone immediately knew that I was not from the island, thus knowing that I am not Gullah. You may think that if you go into a community and you are friendly and you just think everyone's gonna like you. Remember the definition of culture. I was an outsider. We may have been the same color, but I did not have the collective memories, practices, or traditions that they had. So it was very hard initially to live there. But I met Mawiz, who was in her 80s, and she felt compassion for me. So she helped me to learn the language, and she went a step further. What she was able to do, and to this day I have no clue how she did it, but you know, there are a lot of things that go on in life that are not verbalized. They are done by motions and eye movement and all kinds of things. Now, if you're familiar with the group, when someone looks at you a certain way, you know what that means. As a child in church, if we were talking and I happened to catch my father's eye, I knew what that eye meant. So those were the kinds of things that she was able to help me to see in my community, to be able to live there and ultimately become a preservationist and an advocate for them. But enough about me. I'd like to introduce you to the story. The story in Gullah, I'll tell it in Gullah first, so don't be concerned if you don't understand. I am going to translate the story into English. In Gullah, the story is called Kumyain Binya, and the story goes a little like this. He said, I look at that kumya, that thing in the air, what that thing gonna do, it mix up, and trap the death, and mix up, sir. He said, Binya, I look to the one and see that thing, but this young day, see, time where we da. Shh, take that away. Oh, look, we're going to do them Charlie like we die. We start up here, it's not time that thing, tough, what thing, Binya, Bena? Shh, take that away. When I think when I look at you, the other Binya, Bena? Take that away. Oh, they call me up and everything. But see that thing, me do that thing, Tad for them. Sir, the nothing, man. Look at the fitness that. The very full nothing, man. But let me man in very clean the first thing that thing, man. I do it. The nothing, man. You do really full nothing, man. But that is one man. This for it will clean nothing but a stable use and if I don't have you done skip near the first day. And you know what be been on it, try for them. That thing man a flap a wing in it. Shh. Trace after this game, I breast never freeze nothing, man. I will is a room and I buck that there is nothing that if I land to the ground is like a rock. I'm nailing it. And it started to say, oh, Lord, yeah. Please, I'm Warwick, Miss I'm thinking that I'm doing nothing. It did it. He cracked the hell and I'm in a cool, but I stepped in that course. Oh, they call me up and I have a thing because I think no him and I did again. Nothing that for Max and era Max and era Max. But he see the big cat and nothing when I come to the and see the big ball of cool nanny. The big ball of cool nanny. The big ball of cool nanny everywhere, but you never see the nanny moving that thing. But I'm upset, so I'm running down my staff and shh, big Adam, many shh, big Adam, many shh, big Adam. Till you won't cover the community way there. Eat out. In English, the story is called Come Here and Been Here. Now you see, Come Here was a young, feisty thing that was always in the yard just mixing up and throwing up dirt and just always causing some kind of confusion. You see, Ben here used to look through the window and see him do it. So this one day, Ben here walked over to Come Here and said, you know what? It's time to take to the wind. It's time to fly further south. Oh, well, Come Here said, oh, no, I'm not leaving. I like it here. The weather's nice. There's plenty of food. Oh, no, I'm not leaving. Well, you see, Ben here didn't waste a second trying to convince him that he needed to leave. He simply started flapping his wings and took to the skies and started to fly away. And when he looked over his shoulder, all the other Ben heres were flapping their wings and taken to the skies. Well, Come Here was so happy because when he looked around, all the Ben heres were gone. So he started celebrating. First he danced and danced and danced, and then he'd look at the food that he couldn't eat when the Ben heres were there, and he didn't just start eating. He'd walk around sucking down the food. He'd go till he'd eat his stomach full and then go to sleep. But this one morning, as soon as he stepped out of his house, it was so cold until the feathers on top of his head stood straight up in the air, frozen stiff. And then it hit him what Ben here meant when he said, it's time to take to the wind. 'Cause Ben here had been here a long time and had seen many winters. But now Come Here had just got here. He had never seen a winter. So he tried to do the same thing that he saw Been Here do. He started flapping his wings really fast and shot himself up to the sky. But what he didn't understand was this. If it's cold enough on the ground to freeze your feathers stiff, it is much, much colder in the sky. So when he shot himself up to the sky, his breast started freezing. Well, he thought he could turn around and get away from the cold. Then his back started freezing. Then he started falling to the ground just like a rock. He was sure he was going to die. Because if he didn't die from that long fall from the sky to the ground, he certainly was going to die from being frozen to death. So he didn't ask God to save his life. He started saying, "Oh Lord, please save my soul. Oh, please take my soul to heaven. Forgive me for all the mean and rotten things I've done in my life." And as soon as he said that, bam, he hit the ground. He landed so hard he cracked a hole in it. And the cow just stepped right over him and right on top of him. Oh, Come Here was as happy as he could be. Because you see, he didn't die from that long fall from the sky to the ground. And now this warm stuff was thawing him out. He was going to live, so he wanted to get it all over. So he started twisting and mixing. But in the pasture, there was a cat. And the cat came through the pasture every day. And it would see the big piles of cow nanny here, cow nanny there, cow nanny everywhere. But it had never seen nanny that moved, and this one was moving so. So it ran over and started picking at it. And he kept picking at it and kept picking at it until finally he uncovered Come Here. And what did he do? He ate him. Now, you know, all cultures create stories. They create stories for entertainment, but the main reason that cultures create stories is so the older generation can impart some knowledge about life to the younger generation. So usually a story will have a moral to it. In the case of Come Here and Been Here, it has 3. On the islands, if someone does something to us that we don't like, you know what we'll say? "That thing done nanny on me again." But you know, everyone that nannies on you, that is, does something to you that you just don't like, they are not necessarily your enemy. Because you see, when that cow nannied on Come Here, what did it do for him? It warmed him up. It thawed him out. It saved his life. Now, this is the second one. If you find yourself in a bad situation, I mean covered in nanny from head to toe, and someone comes running up to you and says, "Hey, I'm going to get you out of that," and they start picking and picking and picking, Now those people ain't necessarily your friend. Because when that cat uncovered come here, what did it do to him? It ate him. Now this is the third one, and I think this one is the most important. And this one says, maybe it's a price that all of us must pay for living, but at some point in your life, you're going to find yourself in a situation that you do not like. You're going to find yourself in what we call nanny. But if you are safe and if you're secure, if you can be patient and you can be still. What happens to nanny if you leave it out in the sun and don't fool up with it? You know, sometimes I ask audience that question and no one says anything. So then I think they're all urban people and they have no clue. But yes, it will dry, and you know what? One day when you walk past, it won't even be nanny anymore. It will be a fine, powdery substance. No matter what situation you find yourself in, there is something that's inevitable to happen, and that is the wind of change is always going to come. We might not know when it's coming, but it's always going to come. So if you are safe and if you're secure, if you can be patient and you can be still, when that nanny turns to powder and the wind of change comes along, it will blow all that powder away. And unlike come here, you could get up, dust yourself off, and take to the wind. Those are the kinds of tales that they tell in Gullah communities. They tell stories that are generally a little funny short stories, but most of the stories will have a life's lesson that if you listen to the lesson, it really is helpful in your life. So I said that we were going to talk about music. Did I also say that I was going to need your help? Did I forget to mention that? Oh, okay. Well, I'm mentioning it now. Okay. Okay, so we're going to talk about music. When West Africans were introduced to music in Africa, their music was filled with rhythms and movements and beats. But when they came to the New World, they were introduced to the hymns of the Europeans and the Christian faith. Many Africans did not believe in faith-based religions. What they believed in was something that you could see. So they worshiped the rivers and the trees and the sky and the moon and so forth, and varying kinds of creatures. So it was they were reluctant to some degree. They were very reluctant about accepting this Christianity because it's faith-based. You can't see Jesus, can't see God, so it took some time. But some say that once they either heard, now there were some that were able to read during this period, they either heard or they read the story of the Exodus of the Israelites, and also heard that this Jesus was no respecter of person. So they accepted the Christianity because if he did that for these Israelites and he's not a respecter of person, he certainly will do that for them. So they worshiped him. Now, the worship was fine. There was only, when it came to the music, that there was some conflict over that. The Europeans believed that when one worships the Almighty, one should keep their feet firmly planted on the ground. Well, when you think of Africans, or if you think of Native Americans, probably keeping their feet firmly on the ground is the last thought that ever came to any of them. They are accustomed to a lot of movement. So instead of being able to do it in church, what they started to do was sneak out into the woods. And in some areas, they call it a brush harbor. In others, they call it a hush harbor. But what they do is they'd go out in the woods and they'd clear a round circle, and they would go in there and sing and shout and create their own songs. Now, the outer part of this round circle that was just dirt would be tall bushes, and the idea was that would keep them, others from seeing them. Well, when this initially started, then slaves from one plantation might go, but as Christianity was accepted further and further within the slave ranks, slaves from varying plantations would start to meet at a brush harbor or a hush harbor, and they'd sing and shout and then return back to their plantations. When this was brought to the attention of some of the masters of the plantations, the idea was if they started to meet from varying plantations, they might also start to plot to run away. So some of them built what's called a praise house on the plantation. If you go to a plantation that exists today and there was a praise house on that plantation, usually it's the cabin that is closest to the mansion house. That would have been the praise house. Now within the hush harbor, they created their style of music. What they do is they'd make up songs based on what might have happened that day. So they turned that into a song. Now what they also had was they created this system of singing that's called call and response. And call and response simply means you got a leader and you got the backup. Well, that same style of music transferred to children's songs. Now when they transferred it to children's songs, children created their own songs as well. So they weren't singing these praise house type songs, they were creating their own. And their music was usually used to play some kind of game where kids held hands. One of the ones most widely known is called a ring play game. And a ring play game simply means you have a lot of children holding hands, walking around in a circle. There'd be one child in the center. The one in the center is the caller. Each time the song ends, a new child is rotated in until all of them have been callers. To win the game, all you had to do was sing the song the best and shake the best, and you were the winner. So size meant nothing in those games. Anyone could win. So instead of introducing you to praise house music, I thought it might be interesting to introduce you to children's music. So I'm going to need some help. I'm just going to say that another time, so when I call you guys, everyone won't look at me like, oh no, not me. Okay, so the song that I'm going to introduce to you, when they played that ring play game, one kid would come up first and the child would sing this song. So I'm going to sing this song, and all I'm going to need, and then I'm going to come back and get you guys, and all I need you to do is just help me sing the song. See, that's easy. It won't hurt. Okay, so the song, the title of the song is Ranky Tanky. So has anyone ever heard of that song? Oh, that's so good then. Okay, so the song goes like this. Old lady come from Booster, had 2 hens and a rooster. The rooster died, the old lady cried, she can't get the egg like your new stuff. Oh my, you look so, oh pa, you look so. You been there when I been gone, papa and mama gonna buy 'em back. Pin in my head, ranky-tanky, pin in my neck, ranky-tanky, pin in my arm, ranky-tanky, pin in my hand, ranky-tanky, pin in my back, ranky-tanky, pin in my thigh, ranky-tanky, pin in my leg, ranky-tanky, pin in my foot, ranky-tanky. So can we do that song? Sure, we could do the song. I'll tell you how we'll do it. I'll say the line. All you have to do is repeat after me. All right, here we go. Old lady come from Booster. Old lady come from Booster. Had 2 hens and a rooster. Okay. I distinctly heard someone say, rooster. No rooster in this song. Rooster in this song. Okay. All right, here we go. Had 2 hen and a rooster. Had 2 hen and a rooster. The rooster died. The old lady cried. She can't get the egg like you knew, star. Second verse, oh my, you look so. Oh my, you look so. Oh pa, you look so. Oh my, you look so. You been there when I been gone. You been there when I been gone. Hey papa and hey mama gonna buy 'em back. Well, I do believe some of you must be on the choir, because I hear great voices out there. Now, you did notice we didn't actually finish the song, right? Okay. So I'm going to need, say, 6 of you to come up here with me. Now, you can come on your own. And I would just love that if you came on your own. Oh, thank you, sweetie. Now, if you don't come, then I'm just going to draft you. Okay, so you know what we're going to do? Yeah, you in the red back there. Come on down. Tap your friend in the black hoodie. Tell her come on with you. There you go. Okay, right there, you. Yeah. You in the pink, I love New York. Oh, right here, ma'am. Yeah, come on, girl, smile. Let me see a smile on your face. Oh, you know what? I just noticed someone, and she folded her arms. I guess she thought I was finished. I was until I saw her fold her arms. Come on, honey. You know who I'm talking to. There we go. All right, so this is what we're going to do. Let me move this. This is what we're going to do. All of us are going to sing the second verse. But when we get to the part that I go, pain in my head, that's going to be y'all part. Now, you don't have to say pain in the head. You can say pain in any part of the body you like. You just have to say the phrase, and you got to shake something from the first word of the phrase to the last word. Okay, now, when they say that phrase and they shake, our response is, ranky-tanky. So could I hear that? Ranky-tanky. Okay, you guys do know that the chorus of the song really is the attitude of the song. You know that. I mean, some people think it's the lead voice, but no, it's not. It's the chorus. That's the attitude. So when I hear ranky-tanky coming out you guys' mouth, you know what I want to hear? I want to hear ranky-tanky. Oh, I love it. Okay. All right, so this is what we're going to do. We're going to sing the second verse. Now, all of us are going to sing the second verse. Okay, here we go. Oh, my, you look so. Oh, my, you look so. You know, I really don't hear any of you out there. All of us are supposed to be singing the second verse. Okay, so we're going to start from the top one more time. Okay, here we go. Okay, no, I'm first. You after me. Yeah, okay. Oh, my, you look so. Oh, my, you look so. Oh, pa, you look so. Oh, pa, you look so. You been there when I been gone. You been there when I been gone. Hey, papa and hey, mama gonna buy 'em back. Hey, papa and hey, mama gonna buy 'em back. Okay, so did I mention to you that this is usually the part that I sit down? Oh. I guess I'm forgetting everything today. I mean, what is it? I don't even know. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. Let me get on down here so I can take a look at you. Okay, so what's your name? Brittany, and your name? Thomasina. Okay, now this is what we're going to do. We're going to say 1, 2, 3, and I'm either going to call Brittany or Thomasina. And when I call your name, you're going to say your phrase, which is pain in the whatever. And what are we going to say, gang? That sounds wonderful. Thank you. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, Brittany. Oh, thank you, Brittany. I just couldn't have asked for better. I really couldn't have. Okay, so the phrase is pain in some part of the body. So you can say pain in your toes. It doesn't matter, but you have to say it, and you got to shake something from the first word you say to the last word you say, or you'll have to keep repeating it. Yeah, something like that, Brittany. Okay, but I've got to sit down now before you start. Okay. All right. 1, 2, 3, Brittany. Ranky-tanky. Now, see, we don't jump to Thomasina. Thomasina is now last. So whenever you're ready, you can just step on out and do it. No, that wasn't one. No, that wasn't one. And your name is? Adrian. Well, Adrian, that was good. But Adrian, remember I said you had to shake from the first word to the last, and what you kind of did was pain in my, and that really wasn't a shake, you know, that was like a point. So we're going to need you to shake those hands while you know. Okay, you got it? All right. Okay, I have to give you the numbers now. 1, 2, 3, Adrian. Adrian, hold up, Adrian. Okay. Adrian, that was good. So what you may want to do, Adrian, what you're doing, we call that the end shakers, because what you start shaking on the end. So what we're going to need you to do probably is start shaking and then say your phrase, so you'll be already shaking. Okay. 1, 2, 3, Adrian. Ranky-tanky. Ranky-tanky. Hey, ranky-tanky. Ranky-tanky. Oh, ranky-tanky. Ranky-tanky. Oh, ranky-tanky. Thank you, guys. Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Ladies, gentlemen, thank you all so much for that. I do have the last part of the segment I'd like to share with you. It is before you. I'm going to give you a little brief story of how I was introduced to this. This is called rag quilting. My great-grandmother was in her 90s when I remember her. She lived to be 104. And at Christmas time, when we'd go to her house, she had a remnant of a quilt like this. It was frayed, and each Christmas she would take it out and put it on the center of her bed, and everyone that visited her had to go in that room and hear that same story about that quilt every year. So each year, and she'd make sure that children could never touch it. So we'd just wait until everybody was out of the room, then we'd go dive on it, jump off before anyone could catch us. Well, I forgot about it. I started to grow up. She passed away. I forgot all about it. And when I moved to the islands and I started to learn about the history of the Gullah people, for some odd reason, the idea of that rag quilt would not leave my head. By that time, my primary profession for most of these years has been a storyteller, so I travel all over telling stories. And when I'd go somewhere, I would tell people about the rag quilt that I remember from my grandmother as a small, great-grandmother as a small child, and ask them, had they ever seen anything as a child like that? I was so surprised that there were so many people who said that they could recollect something that seemed like what I described. So I kept trying to find out, but no one knew anyone that knew how to do it. And I just decided to go to the community center on Wadmalaw Island one day in the mid-90s and I walk into the door, and there were 7 elderly women, and they were sitting there, and they were rag quilting. Now, as I said, there is no stitching on any of this. They use a nail, work small strips of fabric through burlap, and tie knots. So those same women, that originally was a queen-size quilt, but they added something over the years. They started to put batting in it and put a back on it. A queen-size quilt with that much fabric on it, so you probably will have anywhere from 250 to 260 yards of fabric on the top of it. So with the batting and the back on it, it was about 40 pounds. And oftentimes when I travel, I'm traveling alone, and that was just too heavy to carry around. So I cut it in half. And then I started, it was easier to carry. But these women, for the next 3 years when I met them, off and on, I would go and visit with them. And they would be rag quilting, and I'd sit in the midst, and I had to learn it the way that they learned. So they didn't help you out a whole lot, and if you messed up, they would fuss at you. And it was just the most wonderful thing ever to hear them fussing, because you never took it to heart. It just seems like I was somehow kind of back there when I was a kid with all the old women that I grew up with. Well, they taught me how to do it, but my storytelling career started to take off, which meant I had far less time to hang out with them. And by the time I actually get back to them, it's 2010, and when I get back, all of them have passed away but one. And she was too old to rag quilt. Now that meant I was the last of the active rag quilters, because when they taught me how to do it, I never stopped. I kept doing it and kept trying to get better at it, get faster at it. Well, when I realized there was only one of them left and she could no longer rag quilt, I thought, if you have only one person that does a particular thing, then you're only a heartbeat away from having no one. So I thought we had to do something to try and preserve this textile tradition. So I started what's called the Community Rag Quilting Preservation Initiative. The idea behind that is to look at these little-known textile traditions that, particularly this one, that are of the Gullah people, and try to do something to save them. So we started out with a lecture about it and a demonstration of how it was done. That gradually processed into workshops. So I conduct workshops that are about 4 hours long, where you learn everything from A to Z about rag quilting, including cutting, design, and actually using a variety of different tools. Because that's kind of what I did with rag quilting. I kind of changed it. I stopped using nails and started using other small tools, and you come out, though you're doing the same thing, if you cut it down really low, it looks like a totally different art form. So as a result of doing that, starting the workshops, I also carried this with me. Now this is 1/2 of what's going to be a queen-size quilt. The workshops were launched in October of 2011. So what you see on the table, we've had 1,800 people to put 1 or more pieces onto this. They've been from 17 states and 5 countries. So when we finally finish this half, then we'll begin working the other half. When the entire quilt is completed, then it will go back and travel to every site that has hosted the Community Rag Quilting Preservation Initiative, and along with it will be a folding placard. The folding placard will have all of the names and city and states of all of the people that put 1 or more pieces on to this quilt. Because the idea is that I believe, that your community is not just where you live. Your community is the planet. And it's always been my desire that people from all over the world will have a part in creating this rag quilt. Now, we have contacted a variety of organizations that have us to come and present workshops, because we really want it to succeed. But at the same time, while we are going to all these workshops and we are presenting, people started to come up to me from various parts of South Carolina and start to tell me about all of these old traditions that were in their region that literally no one really knows except the people that live there. So the Community Rag Quilting Preservation Initiative evolved into what we call today South Carolina Textile Traditions. And it is our goal to be able to begin to create some cottage industries throughout the varying regions of South Carolina. And since we have Myrtle Beach, Charleston, Beaufort, Hilton Head that are like tourist visitation places, we believe that if we can partner with some of these sites, then we'll be able to get some of these textile traditions to market. And in doing so, we'll accomplish two things. We'll be able to help to put income into the hands of the people that use their hands to create these art forms. And in addition to that, we'll be able to preserve the varying art forms that represent the regions of South Carolina. So before I go, I guess y'all are going to say, she always is asking us to do something. Before I go, I brought some nails. I want to show you how to do it. And I really would appreciate any of you that are willing, if you would put at least one piece on, and then I can get your name and your city and state. So when we complete it, then your name too will also be on the placard that you have helped to create this rag quilt. Ladies and gentlemen, that's basically all I have to talk to you about today. I mean, that's not all. I could probably talk a long time. But I know you don't want to stay here all afternoon. So those that are able to put at least one piece on, I'd appreciate it. And thank you all so very much for coming. I look forward to coming here again. You've been a great audience. Hold on just a little while longer.